Welcome everybody back to the Brother Rice Podcast. You have myself, Connor, and my co-host, Devin.
Yeah, and today we actually have a special guest with us, John McCaffrey Hilton, history nerd.
Hey there. Well, hello.
Well, John,
Today.
what is your specialty in? Because that's what we're going to be talking about today.
That's a coincidence because today we're going to be talking about my favorite period in this country, the Gilded Age. Specifically, the Gilded Age of Chicago.
Ooh. Now, what do you know about the Gilded Age? Like, what was the time period like?
Well, this was a period of great importance for this city. This time was when we made extreme social change and changes in our technology and beliefs.
Yes, actually today we're going to be talking about, was the Gilded Age a time for Chicago, or was it a bad time?
I mean, none of us before this actually know if we think it was a good or bad time because we wanted this to be purely natural. But Devin, do you think the Gilded Age was good or bad for Chicago?
I would say it was a good time.
John, same question to you. Do you think the Gilded Age was good or bad for Chicago?
Personally, I think it was an amazing time for the city.
Well, this is going to be interesting because I think it was actually an awful time for this city. But before we get into that, since you guys have two people arguing for your side, what's your first point? Why do you think Chicago was so good?
Let's just start out with something small. But really, the reversal of the river. The Lake Michigan had been being polluted by the river, which obviously is still polluted to this day, flowing into it. So, Lake Michigan was where we got all our drinking water. So, Chesborough came up with the idea of, first he came up with the idea of having tubes from farther out in the lake going into the city.
Which didn't work.
Yes, that didn't work. But then he got the grand idea of reversing the river by digging trenches and using the Illinois-Michigan Canal. They were able to reverse the flow of the river, making drinking water clean for the city.
John, what is your opinion? Do you think reversing the river, that would seem like a good thing? What are your opinions on it, since you're such an expert in this time period?
Well, as the expert in this group, I would say this was an amazing thing for the city. It improved our drinking water, which then improved the lives of its residents. While the first few inventions may not have worked, the end result, it ultimately improved the city and made up for the extreme loss of money that this city went through.
Yeah.
Now, Connor,
You know,
why do you think it was not a great time?
well, you see, the river, yeah, it did work. They did reverse it, and they made the drinking water clean. But that was their third attempt. Yes, one of their attempts ended up being the sewer system, which is amazing nowadays. But back then, it still was just polluting the lake even more. And these things costed so much money, and it put our city in a lot of debt. But overall, you could say that it was a good thing for the city. Yes, you now made Lake Michigan drinkable, but the consequences that they had to get there, and they had polluted the lake so much already, and it wasn't really as big of a great thing for Chicago as some people think. So, we know we just talked about this great river changing thing. But now, first to my point, why this was such a bad time for Chicago. There was this madman. His name was H.H. Holmes. This man killed over 200 people during the Chicago World's Fair in his murder castle.
Actually, I'd like to stop you right there. That was just yellow press from the newspapers trying to get more attention and readers.
Yeah, he really only ever killed around 9 people, according to experts.
So what? Your experts are so reliable, you don't even know their names. But that doesn't change the fact that there was wild serial killers running around during the World's Fair, which was where everyone from Asia to Europe to North America all were coming to one place and celebrating culture.
He was one of the very, very few serial killers in Chicago at the time, and he does not represent what was happening in all of Chicago during the World's Fair.
And speaking of the World's Fair, that was one of the best times in all of Chicago history. The buildings were immaculate and grand. The whole world was celebrating all cultures coming together. It was just a beautiful time.
It was a beautiful time. Yes, the World Fair was great, and it brought so many people to Chicago, but not downtown, not the city. And they were on the outskirts of the land. There was a reason they didn't put it in the middle of downtown, such as Paris, where they built the Eiffel Tower right in the middle of the city. No, they put it on the edge of the city because it was stinky, it was dangerous, and it was disgusting in real Chicago. This was fake Chicago. It used to be a swamp. No one lived out there. That's why they put it there.
Yes, that is true. They did put the World's Fair in Jackson Park, which very much is Chicago.
Nowadays.
But it wasn't just because it was and it was stinky and dirty and polluting in the city. And it was also, you couldn't fit a fair in the middle of the city. But it was also, Jackson Park is right on the lake, which is a perfect place to have a fair of beauty and grand architecture. They needed space.
Yeah, but thinking about the World's Fair, I'm just thinking about now. They built these things to be built for 1 year, and then they were being destroyed. And it kind of reminds me of the name, Gilded Age, which is just a thin layer of gold under the darkness and evil that's truly there. If you actually look at it, the World's Fair was that. It was all fake. It wasn't real marble. It was basically rubber. The whole thing was gilded. It wasn't really there. The only building that actually stood up was because they made it, because there was too much fine art. They actually had to make a real building, and it's the reason it's the only thing that still stands today.
All right, John. So, you're the specialist here. Why do you think this was such a good time for Chicago?
Well, one of my original points was that it changed the beliefs of the city. And one of those beliefs was the belief in higher wages. During this time, the company town, it employed many people. They had homes and they had jobs. Well, this time also brought a new reformation that we take for granted nowadays, the 8-hour workday. Back in the days of the company town, the 8-hour workday was non-existent. You woke up and went to work without question, and you were paid barely nothing. You did not matter in the grand scheme of things. The riots that took place because of this hereby changed the foundation of working in general for this country and the city of Chicago. Back in those days, people were working basically dawn to dusk without any breaks. And while they were doing this, their wages were being cut while rent was not changing. This caused them to rise up, with their leader being named Eugene Debs, demanding 8-hour workdays and higher wages so that they could afford to live in their own houses.
Yeah, and I would say that was a pretty good change to Chicago, since I know I, at least, really loved that 8-hour workday.
It's very hard to argue with that. It was great for the city. Yes, it was amazing and all this. It should have happened earlier, but there's really nothing bad you can say about making the work hours less and people getting paid what they should.
I completely agree.
No.
So, as our final topic, we're gonna go back to Connor. So, Connor, what drives your perspective? Why do you think the Gilded Age was such a poor period for this great city?
I mean, really, they just disrespected the poor. Everything was about the rich. talking about the rich and the poor like this. You see, there was one of the worst on-water disasters ever to happen in Chicago and the entire world, and it happened on the Chicago River, and barely anyone knows about it. This was so bad because no one knows about it because it wasn't the rich that died. On the Titanic, people was like, oh, one of the worst casualties on sea in the world. It wasn't even close to this disaster on the Chicago River because the river and the people that died weren't rich. The people on the Titanic had a lot of money, so people cared about them. But the people in Chicago, they were only newspapers for about 2, maybe 3 days about this huge disaster, which killed almost 800 people, and 75% of them were under the age of 25. But no one covered it because they didn't care about these poor kids. They only would have cared if they were rich.
Oh, and what was this disaster that you've been talking about?
This was the Eastland disaster, and the reason I've been saying the name because I wanted him to ask that question. It just proves he had no idea what I was talking about because no one knows about this. And it just shows how corrupt Chicago was and a bad place it was to live.
That is a good point.
Well, that's all the time we got today. So the Brother Rice people and John
And
McCaffrey
me.
Hilton are out of here.
No,
And we'll
address
see you
me as
guys all
Professor.
next time. Sorry.
Don't
Goodbye.
forget to check out
Yeah.
our weather channel on W this week.
Bye.